Without further ado, Patty Donohoe.
Can everyone hear pretty well? Okay, good. It's so nice to meet all of you. I'm glad you could come out tonight to hear about our 3 teenage pilgrims that are buried over in the Cove Cemetery, not far from here. So I'm going to start with a little story to just get you in the mood, and also something that you might be able to relate to. Growing up in the 1950s in Tennessee, I never thought much about the pilgrims. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about them. I often drive by the Cove burying ground. When I have a chance, I glance over to see what's been left at the markers. For Constance, Giles, and Joseph. Flowers, stones, shells, and sometimes, I admit, I leave something too. So on Compact Day, you'll see in this next slide, this is Joseph. And the next slide, please. You'll see I left a candle on Compact Day in 2020, just because it was a special time to be remembering them. And you'll see the mums and, well, all kinds of things that are there amongst the detritus and the well wishes. After my grandparents moved into a nursing home in Jamestown, I became more interested in my family history. I regretted that I hadn't asked them more questions, so I got up the courage to interview my mother's sister, my Aunt Chi-Chi, who is a force. This exchange of information that we had and ideas lasted until last year when she passed away at the age of 96. My mother and my grandmother had not shown any interest at all. I became the gatekeeper of my family genealogy. Is that the same for you? Maybe some of you are nodding your heads about that. Yeah, that it ends up in our place, and we're grateful for it. This is me, in the next slide, at the family graveyard in Chilhowie, Virginia, and this was taken last April. I recently learned a new term for this kind of family. Quote, a lost colony of Mayflower descendants in, and fill in the blank. They exist in many places in this country. I read about one group in Cape May Beach, Maryland. This is how they were described in the article I read. Unknown to the outside world and long forgotten by the descendants themselves. For instance, I'm from the lost colony of Mayflower descendants in Sugar Grove, Virginia, who left Eastham around 1750 for Dutchess County, New York. 25 years later, some of the leaders of the group purchased land in Sugar Grove. Perhaps they were attempting to avoid the war with Mother England. Well, as you can see from the markers, the war found them. Captain Joseph Cole, my 5th great-uncle, fought with the Virginia Rangers at the bloody but decisive Battle of Kings Mountain. So first we'll talk about our resident teenager, Constance Hopkins Snow. The first record that we have of her is of her baptism, 11 May 1606, in Hursley, Hampshire, England, at All Saints Church, the same church where I discovered that her father and her siblings were baptized. And so I have them all written down here because it's quite a list. His brother, Stephen Hopkins, was her father, and his brother William, 1575, his sister Alice, 1576, Stephen himself, 1581, Susanna, the younger sister, in 1584. Then the children of Stephen, Constance, in 1606, and Giles, in 1607. And then you can see in the corner right that there is a font there. That is the baptismal font, where all of them were baptized. Constance was 14 when she came to America on the Mayflower. After reading about her life, several themes emerged. The first theme was survival. Constance was barely 3 years old when her father, Stephen Hopkins, signed on as a minister's clerk aboard the Sea Venture. In 1613, her older sister, Elizabeth, and her mother, Mary Kent Hopkins, died 4 months apart. Now, as wards of the church, she and her 5-year-old brother Giles had an uncertain future at best, as their father was presumed lost at sea. The next thing changed. When Stephen Hopkins returned from his adventures in 1616, he must have had many tales to tell, surviving a hurricane or tempest, being shipwrecked in Bermuda, finally arriving in Jamestown Colony to find the place in dire straits. Constance and Giles would soon have a new mother. The 16th of February, 1618, their father married Elizabeth Fisher. In September 1620, the Hopkins family and other passengers set sail from Plymouth, England on the Mayflower. Captain Jones and his crew headed to Jamestown. Sometime during the 66-day journey, Constance must have assisted at the birth of her baby brother, Oceanus. Once at anchor in Cape Cod Bay, Constance likely participated in washing the mountains of clothes on wash day, the 23rd of November, 1620. And the laundry would keep coming, as she would eventually be the mother of 12 children and the grandmother of 73. A lot of laundry. So I also examined traits about her in the things I read. She was a nurturer, a big sister, a wife, and a mother. She would marry Nicholas Snow, who arrived on the ship Anne in 1621. And along with her stepmother Elizabeth, hostess to native peoples, Samoset and Abenaki, and Squanto, the Patuxet. In this role, she may have learned to converse in their languages, as her father had. According to the 1623 land division records of Plymouth, her father received land on Watson's Hill next to Hobomok, the Pokanoket, and his family. And he had a few wives with him, so that was an interesting experience for her, I'm sure. Constance, no doubt, because of her good qualities, was also a good neighbor. The family continued living in town, using the newly acquired land for farming, so they still lived on Main Street, well, whatever it was called, Leiden Street. So I also looked at her life decisions. As a woman of her time, she had few options when it came to making decisions outside the home. Mayflower passengers and other early settlers were subject to a common land system, which grew tiresome after a few years. So they had like we have, all of us do, and through history, 3 choices about land. We can own it privately, we can have it in common, as they tried in the new colony, or we can be under the state, as in China, where no one can own property. So those are the 3 choices, and we can see they did not work well for these people. By 1623, Governor Bradford decided that every family would receive a parcel of land according to their number. This apparently led to greater contentment. And here's a quote from Bradford's of Plymouth Plantation. Quote, "The women now went willingly into the field and took their little ones with them to plant corn, while before they would allege weakness and inability, and to have compelled them would have been thought great tyranny and oppression." In 1627, the purchasers, including Stephen Hopkins and Nicholas Snow, along with 50 others and some London investors, bought out the original group of investors. They would now own their own land, home, and livestock, the latter by drawing lots. That must have been a glorious day for Constance, especially because Constance and Nicholas would soon marry that same year. So this was the home, and this is the plaque on the home of Stephen Hopkins. This was the land that they owned there, and then of course up on the hill they had their farm and also had cattle and so forth when those came along. Here's the family tree of the Snow family. And you can see all those glorious children and who they married. The women are by their married name on the right and the men on the left. In 1639, when her stepmother died that winter, Constance's sisters were 12, 9, 7. Damaris was the 12-year-old, Ruth the 9th, and Elizabeth the 7th. In 1642, a troublesome 15-year-old, Jonathan Hatch, became a servant in the Hopkins household. Sadly, Stephen Hopkins died in June of that year, 1644. Jonathan left for Barnstable, married, and helped to found, wait for it, the town of Falmouth. Yes, he turned himself around, and I'm sure it was a lot because of the example of Stephen Hopkins. Our Cape Cod DAR chapter here is named, part of the name is for his son, who was a Revolutionary War soldier. In 1645, the couple decided to move with other purchasers to Nauset on the Lower Cape, back to the place where the Mayflower exploring party, including Stephen Hopkins, first encountered the native peoples. In June 1644, a committee of the new Plymouth Colony Church, consisting of Mr. William Bradford, Mr. Thomas Prince, and divers others, purchased, and this is interesting what they bought the land with moose skins, Indian beads, wampum, and little knives. This is what the natives requested for payment. From the Nauset territory, approximately lying in what is now Orleans, Eastham, and Wellfleet. The Eastham settlers were among the most useful citizens of Plymouth. Plymouth and the Plymouth Church regretted their departure. However, owing to the urgent need for a settlement on that portion of the Cape, on or about April of 1644, some 14 prominent families began leaving for Nauset, where they immediately organized a community. And of course, Nicholas was right up there in the government. He was assigned to the office of town clerk, and he remained so until 1662, when his son Mark, married to Governor Prince's daughter Jane, succeeded him in the task. So have you ever seen Constance's hat? Isn't it beautiful? No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, it actually was a very expensive item, and only for those who could afford it. So you can see this, as it says in the caption here, at the Pilgrim Hall Museum in Plymouth. And there's another view of it. You can see a little better. A little tattered after 402 years. In 1651, the Plymouth Colony Court declared that the name of the settlement be changed to Eastham. Yes. And here's some of the land that was given and who gave it. Madaquasan, Pochit, and some small islands off of Podonamaquit, all of Nemskakit, which is a lot of property. Where's Nemskakit? What do we call Nemskakit now? Brewster. George, another sachem, sold land north of that to Billingsgate, all the way up there. Lieutenant sold Little Billingsgate. And this continued. In 1653, the Sachem Wano and his son Sachemus sold land in Manamoik and Nemskakit, some more Nemskakit land. But this was the interesting thing about that record. There was a mention of horses. So I'll repeat that date again, and it was repeated at other times in the record, in the land records. Thanks to Edith, she brought us a book with all those wonderful land records in it. And just, it really clarified what was done and who it was done with. And so those dates were 1659, the horses were mentioned, 1660, 1661, when the land was being assigned. So there were horses here, and they were brought by the natives. Nicholas left this earth the 15th of November, 1676. He made an extensive will, which included tools, wearing apparel, and a great deal of land. Constance outlived him by almost a year, dying in October of 1677. So now I'd like to discuss a few things with you. One of the things I was really interested in with these early settlers was what they lived in. Did they live in a wetu in the beginning? Some of the authors that I read believe so, that they constructed the wetu much as they had seen the native peoples do so. And of course, this is Plymouth. Did they carry on the design over into the settlement here? But also, I've talked to some people at Plymouth recently, and they're revisiting this style. They've also discovered that there's some maybe changes they are going to make in the future as they repair them, as they age. This was the meeting house here. Can you see how it's constructed? Post and beam. Can't see it inside, but it's there. Some of them. This is Hoxie House down in Sandwich. And it was around 1650 that this was begun to be designed. And it was occupied later on, about 20 years after that, by the minister there. But look at this design. What do we call this? A salt box, right. So did they build salt boxes here? This house we know was here, and this is from The Evolution of the Cape Cod House by Art Richmond, who's a part-time resident here in this town. And whose home is this? I bet you recognize it. Do you recognize this home? It actually wasn't a home at the end of its life. It was a pig place. They kept the pigs in it. It's true. True story. This is
Governor Prince.
Yeah, Governor Prince.
Where was the house actually located?
We think it was over as you turn up to Fort Hill. That was his land up there. That's a good question, Sheila. But anyway, that is a construction, and we call this a half cave. This is a half cave construction. So was that the style that they chose? This is the Sparrow House. We're going to hear about the sparrows in a few minutes, but I love this one. I love the beautiful windows. Is that a gambrel roof? I can't tell. Or maybe it's a salt box, I'm not sure.
It's salt box.
Yeah. Sure. Okay, thank you. We'll just hold that up there for a minute. Okay. So what are your thoughts? What do you think they did when they came here? And what have you read about? What were the homes like? Has it occurred to you? Have you thought about it? No. Okay. So keep thinking. Maybe we'll talk at the end of the presentation and get some of your thoughts as we go forward. We know they eventually did build English-style models, yet none survive in Eastham from this period. And that one by Governor Prince, the one he built, is not here now. But it lasted a couple of 100 years. So I don't know when its demise was. Does anyone know that? No? Okay. So next we'll talk about Giles Hopkins. Giles' life experiences parallel that of his sister, but his personality was apparently much different than hers, and his adventurous father. In the history and genealogy of the Mayflower planters and first comers to Ye Olde Colony, Leon C. Hills writes, quote, "On the Mayflower voyage, he was one of the quieter boys and developed a retiring disposition as he grew old, entirely unlike his father and younger brother Caleb." Josiah Payne writes, quote, "He appears to have been of a retiring disposition, only forward when duty impelled. He did sign up to go with his father and Caleb to help with the Pequot conflict in eastern Connecticut in 1637, but they weren't needed there. The following year, Stephen Hopkins was allowed to build a house across the bay in Matakees, which is now Yarmouth. He bought land from Ino, who was a sachem there. He was a Mashpee, and You could actually, do you know where this plaque is located on 6A? Maybe you've noticed it. So you drive right across at the little, they have a post office, the little one, the little Comican one, and then right across you'll see the plaque. And if you walk by the fence all the way back, you can come to his marker. And you can see that that tradition of putting stones on top is safe for him. One of those stones is mine. He was quite a fellow. I've read a bit about him. And he sold the land to Stephen Hopkins that Giles inherited. We'll get to that in a second. Life decisions for Giles. By 1642, Giles apparently missed his family enough to move to Eastham. He sold the house in Yarmouth to Andrew Hallett Jr. in that year. A theme of his life: quiet success and fortunate circumstances. Now, we all know he's shy from what we've been able to discern. When his father passed away and the will was read, there was a surprise. It seems Stephen preferred his younger son Caleb over the eldest Giles, and demonstrated this by leaving him sizable land holdings, and all to Caleb and none to Giles. Certainly, they were more alike. Caleb was a seaman and had a big personality like his father. But Caleb was also generous. He gave up a large tract of land in Nemskakit to his brother. Sadly, Caleb died at sea near Barbados, April of 1651. Giles came into possession of his land, and he continued to go about his business quietly, I might add, purchasing valuable tracts of land throughout the Lower Cape. He's a very wealthy man at his death. Life decisions. However Giles Hopkins could be provoked, one William Leverage tried to defame him, and Giles sued him and won £2 and some shillings for his effort. Giles passed from this earth the 16th of April, 1690. Catherine, his wife, died the previous year, in March of 1689. Can we see his tree? So this is Giles' family tree, and he had 10 children of his own, and they had longevity also going for them. We'll see that in a moment as well. Let me hold it up there for just a moment. So as I just said, his descendants lived to great ages, and this is a quote from Josiah Payne in the Cape Cod Library, number 33. He took good care of his health, and apparently that of his family. Joseph Rogers, our third passenger and resident. Joseph was born in Watford, Northamptonshire, to Thomas Rogers and Alice Cosford. At the age of 18, Joseph was the oldest of the 3 teenagers that are the subject of this presentation. He came with his father, a widower on the Mayflower, leaving his siblings behind in Holland. Now, I might add that this is controversial. I did read that they were brought here, but there is no record amongst the records in Plymouth of them. So he did have a brother, his younger brother, John, that did come eventually. His father perished during the first hard winter in New Plymouth. Joseph appears to have resided in the Bradford household until 1623. I'm glad that someone took care of him, so that always made me feel good that he was able to find a home. In the 1623 land division, where he received 2 acres of land on the south side of the Eel River towards the bay, near William Bradford, the Allertons, the Billingtons, Cooks, and Fullers, all named our passengers. Life decisions. 10 years later, Joseph married Hannah. Her name is unrecorded. His younger brother John was in Plymouth as well by that time. Around this time, according to the Plymouth Colony records, the people began to grow in their outward estates by by the flowing of many people into the country, especially into the Massachusetts colony, by which means cattle and corn rise to great price, good now plentiful, and many are enriched, and now their stock increasing. There is no longer anything holding them together. By this means, they scatter about the bay. So if you can see it, Plymouth Harbor is up to the west, and they called it not just Duxbury, but Duxborough. So you can see that as an interchangeable title. And you can see that down below is the Jones River and inland, and near that stage is where we find Joseph living at some point. So we'll get to that in a second. So we'll just keep that map up for a moment. The 25th of March in 1633, Joseph and Brother John were granted 50 acres of upland and on the North River. Men like Miles Standish, John Alden, Thomas Prince, and William Collier began settling north of New Plymouth into what would become Duxbury in June 1637. Joseph was allowed to establish a ferry there near his house, so we assume that he lived close to or on the river. I love this map, and I'm going to have a confession. I just looked at all kinds of different maps, and I like this one best, but I can't find the source. I have to go back and figure out where I got it from. But I just love it. I love the old maps. And I like that it notated on the left certain places, like the place where the pilgrims landed on Clark's Island. And then the brook that we just talked about, Jones River. And then the island where, of course, they had their first Sabbath, which was Clark Island. So we might know more about their years in Duxbury, but here's another sad fact. The town records were likely burned in the home of Miles Standish by mistake. So we do not know much about their life once they moved there. And that was because, and this is just supposition, I don't think they have complete proof of this, his son Alexander was then the town clerk, and that he was the one that by mistake burned records. I know, pretty bad. And fires are just all over, aren't they? Whenever you're looking for ancient records, it's really sad when you run into a courthouse or a home where the records were and they were no longer. So here are some things I found about our friend Joseph. Leadership. He was definitely a leader. In 1647, the colony court appointed lieutenant to exercise the men at arms. So he was a lieutenant. And from thenceforth, he called Lieutenant Joseph Rogers. He held this position for many years, from 1647 to 1661, and again in 1664. In 1646, he sold his land in Duxbury and moved his family to Nauset. By 1647, where again he was mentioned as a lieutenant in that town. He already had land in Amskeket, which came to him as a purchaser. Sorrow. So life didn't always work out for him. His eldest son and the husband of Susanna Dean, the year following their marriage in 1661, he fell from his horse. With such violence, he died within 2 days' time. Had he lived just a few more months, this is Joseph, he would see 2 of his sons, James, the husband of Mary Payne, and Thomas, perish in the same year. They all died the same year. There was only one son and heir left, and his name was John, and his wife was Elizabeth Twining. But the good news was they had many children, so the name kept going. Is that who you're related to? Yeah. Joy. I like to end this portion of my talk with joy. Benaiah or Beriah, it appears in different names in different records. Joseph's grandson, by daughter Elizabeth, who married Jonathan Higgins, lived with him until his death. He was rewarded for this with land in Plymouth, or we call it true. So let's go to the next. So this is one of our maps here in the schoolhouse, and it's really good to help pinpoint where all of these folks lived. I love looking at it because they chose to live on the town cove mostly. So if you, I know it's kind of hard to see, but if you see, look at the names, and this map is, I think, 1837. Eileen, is that right? Something like that. I think it's 1837, so it's been a while, but they're still there. Hopkins, Rogers, Snows. It's very interesting to see. And if you look, I'll go over here. Maybe that's what I should do. I'll just hobble myself over here. This is the town cove. This is Rock Harbor, so we can get our bearings a little bit. And then Nauset was the area that the Snows lived in, and there must be 8 Snows living right here at that time. So this is Snows Point. You can actually drive out there and see the land. It's beautiful. And if you go over to the National Seashore Park and you look across the salt pond, you can see in that beautiful view that you see at the back of that building, you can look across at Snows Point. It's one of the prettiest sights, I think, on Cape Cod, and Fort Hill, of course, but I love that view that you can go and see. And that would be the land where the Hopkins lived, the Snows lived, sorry.
What year is this map?
This map is 1837.
Because Boat Meadow was connected to the town cove, but I don't see that.
I'm not sure, maybe it's the mask. What did you say again?
Boat Meadow. Said Boat Meadow
Meadow
was connected to, there's a way out to, it was part of the town cove. So I don't see that on there.
No, I don't either.
Well, it could be in that little corner.
And it could be, I know that some things are like down below too. Here's Nantucket, it's almost out of
Yeah, the Boat Meadow's up.
But the Boat Meadow's up here.
Yeah.
Yeah, under the very house.
You see it underneath, look, it says Boat Meadow.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, I didn't see it. Where
No.
Stop and Shop is, used to be it was filled in. It was part of this
Are you
marsh.
kidding? That's Stop and Shop right there.
You can tell the rotary was a marsh, but
That's true.
that went right, the water went right out into the ocean, but I don't see that.
Well, yeah, the canal was
I will
right.
never look at Stop and Shop the same. The Boat Meadow. It's so interesting to see that they did maintain their land for this farm, and probably still do. I know there are some descendants that are still on the land, even to this day. But I have driven out Nauset Road and gone all the way down to Snows Point, and it is gorgeous. So there's so many pretty places and that have been preserved. I wish the houses had, but I guess we can't have everything. So I'd like to show you just a couple more slides, and we can talk a bit, because I love that you're interacting. This is good. It makes you think to see some of these things. So this is our friend Carrie Helm. She is a native Wampanoag, and she is responsible for making our 1620 reproduction basket on the left, and also our pot that she crafted for us. This is also a 1620 reproduction. So that's Carrie in the middle, and this is a picture I took of her and, of course, of our artifacts. You can see them at the back as you go out. They're in that case right behind you. And I love what she showed me that day. In fact, we were there with my grandson, William, and she showed us that they would take bones and all kinds of things to make items, useful items. And they would show this to the people, to the English when they came. I love the one on the right, the pot. Isn't it beautiful? It has a cloud on each side, which I guess is what you go for when you're firing a pot of this kind. But the really distinctive thing about this pot is that it's like a crock pot. So you take it off the fire, and it continues to cook for 2 hours. So it's rather remarkable. And then I love the little basket. Isn't it sweet? It's not only useful, it's decorative and beautiful. And the dyes, the purple dye, I just think is so great. So Carrie was just explaining that, and then when we were in the parking lot, when she was delivering these 2 items to our museum, she said, you know, I've been working with the people in Plymouth, and what we've discovered is some really amazing interactions between the English and the Wampanoag that have now been proven. And you know, you can write things down, you can send it back and forth through time, or send information to one another, but when you see the artifact, it's a whole different level of truth. And so what they've been able to do there, have any of you seen the film that's on the internet about this discovery? Is this ringing a bell with anyone? So I'm going to give you the website that you need to go to, because it's a great follow-up to this discussion. And we didn't get to talk much about the Native people, because they were a huge part of this story. But I just felt the time had to be with the 3 teenagers, as I had advertised. But anyway, it's plymouth.org /exhibitions/research/exhibitions. So you go on YouTube, and you can't even imagine how great this website is. They show this discovery, and what they did, as you can imagine, thinking about Plymouth right now. There's so many houses there, it's pretty thickly populated. So where would they dig as an archaeology project? And this is UMass, and you know UMass is sending out a lot of these young people that are being trained in archaeology, trained in ground penetrating radar, which we learned about last week with Tom Ryan. But anyway, they found this one space, and it was unoccupied, and they started digging. And this is where they found so many artifacts, and that's what this film is about, partly, about that. And they dedicated a room of it at Plymouth Patuxent for their finds. And essentially what they found was that there was a great interaction, because it wasn't until 1638 that the English pottery started showing up, because it was coming in, kind of the last thing to come in from the mother country. And so they used a lot of these implements that the Native people have, and they've proven it with this dig. So you need to go see it. I would love to have just said, I'll sit here, you can watch the film. But it's a really great film, and if you didn't get a chance to write it down just now, I can give you this link so you can go to it. It's a short film, but it's really powerful to see how much they interacted and how much they meant to each other. For 50 years, that cooperation wasn't perfect, but there was a great deal of it, and this was like the artifact proof of some of that. And so I thank Carrie, because she was very involved in the dig. My last slide is kind of my motto, and I hope that you got a little string of that through the presentation, that we have been paid for. And this, of course, is Maya Angelou. And it's very important for us to remember that we are here because of others, and that we have been paid for by them. And I'm especially grateful for those 3 teenagers that were able to, despite all odds, come here and do what they did. The artwork is by a family member, Megan Scott, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.